What's up, Paso? Um, Give me a second to fix this. There we go. Cool. My name is José Olivarez. I'm excited to be here with all of you today. I'm gonna start by reading a poem from my first book. This is called Mexican American Disambiguation. It's after a poet named Idris Goodwin. My parents are Mexican, who are not to be confused with Mexican Americans or Chicanos. I am a Chicano from Chicago, which means I'm a Mexican American with a fancy college degree and a few tattoos. My parents are Mexican, who are not to be confused with Mexicans still living in Mexico. Those Mexicans call themselves Mexicanos. American colleges call them international students and diverse. My mom was white in Mexico, and my dad was mestizo, and after they crossed the border, they became diverse and minorities and ethnic and exotic. But my parents call themselves Mexicanos, who again should not be confused for Mexicanos living in Mexico. Those Mexicanos might call my family gringos, which is the word my family calls white folks, and white folks call my parents interracial. Colleges say, put them on a brochure. My parents say, ¿Qué significa esa palabra? I point out that all the men in my family marry lighter-skinned women. That's a Chicano in me, which means it's a fancy college degrees in me, which is also diverse in me. Everything in me is diverse, even when I eat American foods like hamburgers, which, to clarify, are American when a white person eats them and diverse when my family eats them. So much of America can be understood like this. My parents were undocumented when they came to this country. And by undocumented, I mean sin papeles. And by sin papeles, I mean royally fucked, which should not be confused with the American dream, though the two are cousins. Colleges are not looking for undocumented diversity. My dad became a citizen, which should not be confused with keys to the house. We were safe from deportation, which should not be confused with walking the plank, though they're cousins. I call that sociology, but that's just a Chicano in me, who should not be confused with the diversity in me, or the Mexicano in me, who is constantly fighting with the upwardly mobile in me, who is good friends with the Mexican American in me, who the colleges love, but only on brochures, who the government calls non-white Hispanic or white Hispanic, who my parents call mijo, even when I don't come home so much. I want to read a poem from Por Siempre. This book just came out earlier this month, and I think it's cool. The photographs are by a photographer named Antonio Salazar, who's out of Phoenix, and I really love his photos. One of the things that he does that kind of appeal to me is the photos he takes. The photos he takes are have like a roughness to them that are still, but they're always really beautiful. Sorry, it's hard to find the poems in here because they're kind of spread throughout the book. All right, I'll read this poem. Yeah. So this is a book of photos and poems, and the way that I like to think about it, it's like a conversation. You know, we're kind of always talking to each other. So there's a poem I wrote while kind of thinking about his photos. The poem wants, it desires, 4 boxing gloves between the ropes. What would you do with 2 minutes and the person who wronged you the most? Unwrap every wrong until it shines in the light. Like plucked flowers, most tough talk limps with time. The poem knows something about anger. Hold it too long and it poisons the holder. Can the same be said for love? Digestion turns all tasty treats into the same shit. Dead flowers attract gnats. Even misery is a show. The poem desires an audience. A right hook to the temple will cure you of whatever ailment you're holding on to. It's hard to hold a grudge from the ground. When we suffer, we want a witness. The secret to taking a punch is to accept it. The curse of being a human is no matter how much love we get one day, we require more love the next day. That's our poem. This is what the book looks like. Yeah, I love the photos in the book. So, look at that. And now I'll read a few poems from Promesas de Oro. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm excited to talk to you if you have any questions. I'll kind of start with kind of the poems that kind of, for me, were the beginning of the book, and that is poems about my family. So this is a poem I wrote for my mom. It's called An Almost Sonnet for My Mom's Almost Life. In the life where my mom never has kids, she doesn't mourn. She spends her 20s following Marco Antonio Solis show to show, hands up in surrender, in praise to a different God than the one she spends Sundays kneeling to now. I love imagining her like this. Her name, Maria Maria, a name the men curse to the heavens, from Guadalajara to Oaxaca, holy name of the mother reborn a mother to none. She babies herself, and maybe some lucky men, but only for a minute. Oh, I know my mom would protest. She would be bored without her family and God. My brothers blasting rap music in the basement, smoke reddening their eyes. Do our bellies of joy give joy to our Maker? Reader, I am a parent to nothing, not even a plant. All I know is those Saturday mornings I've shared a coffee with my mom while love songs play on the radio and she stirs her coffee with her eyes closed, dreaming of a life where her slight smiles are her own and only her own. So that's one I wrote for my mom. I'll read one that I wrote for my dad. If I can find it. The book is so new, so I'm still getting used to reading from it. 27. This poem is called Regret When My Dad Says Love. What do I want to say? Yeah, this is a poem that I wrote for my dad. My dad never said regret, but it hung from his lip like a cigarette. I remember that night in Mexico, my dad home with a little bit of money, diaspora dreamboat. In another life, he could have flirted with the whole bar. In this life, he was home by midnight, my baby brother sick on vacation. To be a dad is to be bossed at work and bossed at home. It's easy to daydream about love when it's a chorus of kisses. What about when love is a dirty diaper and a snot nose? My dad rarely said love, but he always left the bar. When I was walking in, I walked by like the video game lab. That's very cool. So one of the things that I thought about after my first book came out is I got to have conversations with a bunch of people, and people were excited to talk to me about a couple of themes in particular, right? The themes of family and then the themes of migration. And both of those themes are important to my work. But for me, like, another important part of my work is thinking about class. So I went to college at Harvard University, and when I arrived there, everyone tried to kind of push me into like the Latino student groups, which was cool. I went, but I realized very quickly that not all of the Latinos there were like, we weren't the same just as we were Latinos, right? Like some of them their parents were millionaires and they flew into the country and they already had everything sorted out. Whereas like my family had to move to the United States. And so I want to read maybe a couple poems that are thinking about class. So this poem is called Wealth. It's after a poet named Lucille Clifton. Wealth. Don't talk to me about wealth. When I got into Harvard, my guys joked it was to mow the lawns. I laughed until I met my roommates and they offered me a broom. If I accepted the broom and beat the cobwebs out of their heads, do you think I'd forget? Now I make poems in languages they can't register. You feel me? In every poem I hide garden shears, invitations to banquets, and they still don't spell my name right. Apologies. When they say Jose, the only people to turn their heads are me and the janitors, line cooks, waitstaff, yes, landscapers. Jose el poeta y Jose the gardener, each of us biting our tongues, trying to make beauty grow from soil covering bones barely under the surface. Then I read this poem. This poem is called Ugly. It's on page 82. This is also a sonnet. I wrote a bunch of sonnets for this book because my brain broke during the pandemic. And so all I really had space for was like 14 lines. That's what a sonnet is. Ugly. I'm done with beauty. The rich can have it. Done trying to imitate their laser-printed faces. What do I know of beauty, but my brother's lip only smiles. He started smiling with his whole mouth once he got his teeth fixed. The joke's on him. He's still ugly. Apologies for all the eyes I've wounded with my bald head and unibrow. I know I'm ugly like pigeons on street corners, refusing to die. Maybe peacocks are prettier, but I've never seen one in real life. Out here, we wear the fuck out of our common feathers. Ugly like my brother, ugly like my daddy, ugly like laughing with your whole face and never apologizing. All right, I think I'll read maybe 2 more poems. And yeah, thank you all for listening. I'm excited to hear your questions. This poem is called Eating Taco Bell with Mexicans. All right. The poem mentions Erica, and Erica is the name of my wife. The day I introduce Erica to my brothers, I warn her. My brothers are extra Mexican. What does that mean, she asks. I repeat, extra Mexican. When we hang out, they talk to her in English and ask her how she can love someone as ugly as me. Do you have bad breath? Are your teeth fake? What's wrong with you? Why do you love our brother? They laugh in Spanish at their own jokes. They play Mario Kart and sing along to Bad Bunny. They say they're broke and blame capitalism. They say they're single and blame capitalism. They say they're in love and blame capitalism. They ask Erica if she's hungry and tell her she's in luck. Erica nods. She kisses me on the cheek in a language that needs no translation. She points at me and says, "He's the lucky one." My brothers laugh because she speaks their language of dumb jokes. They promise to take her to the bomb Mexican spot. The Mexican spot Mexicans try to keep a community secret. Then they take her to Taco Bell. I'll end with this poem. This poem is a friend that I wrote. This poem is a poem I wrote for my friend Nate. It's called Nate calls me soft. If we were better at being honest, maybe it wouldn't take a bottle of something strong to make us talk straight. Straight edge as we used to be, driving around in that old Toyota Tercel from open mic to open mic. If I confess that the memory alone makes a corner of my eye itch, would you call me soft? Nate says yes. B says duh. Adam says you were the softest. My therapist says, let's talk about your parents. My brothers say, if all you're gonna do is talk, then pass the blunt. Mexican Jesus says nothing. Mercury is in reggaeton. Do the stars only talk to women? Tonight the stars are hidden by the brass lights of the city, and I want to say my friends can see my softness through all the jokes I crack, but maybe I don't need the stars to be tender. Maybe the next time I see you, I'll slap away the dap, pull you in close, and tell you under the ordinary streetlights how much I love you and that you still ain't shit. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So I'm not super familiar with you. This is the first time I've ever been introduced to you as an author. And I've noticed that you have kind of like comedy within your poems. Is that because just you as a person, that's how you're able to like deliver your storyline? Or what's the convenience of that?
I use humor when writing poetry for a couple reasons. One is because it's hard to write about serious things directly. It hurts too much, or it very quickly can fall into cliche, right? And so for me, humor is a way to approach those topics that are hard, right? If I'm writing about belonging and family, if I'm writing about like the difficult relationship between my dad, or if I'm writing about even something softer like love, right? Humor is a way to kind of get closer while still keeping it new and fresh and giving it like a different texture. So for me, humor works for that reason. But the other reason is, I think about writing a lot like visual art, right? Visual artists use all the colors available to them when they're painting. And I feel like as writers, we should use all of the different emotional textures. And so why not use humor? Why not use, seriousness? So for me, it's just a way to like add different layers to the writing that might make the work interesting, that might help smooth out some of the hard parts.
Just kind of piggyback off of what she said. This is not my first time hearing about you, and I love all of your work. And I was just thinking, you said you use humor to talk about the hard stuff. In Promesas de Oro, what would you say was the hardest part about writing that book that you said, okay, let me take a step back or anything like that?
The hardest part of writing Promesas de Oro is I wrote the book during the pandemic for the most part. And so I was trying to write about family at a time that I couldn't be sure that my family was going to be safe. And both of my parents got sick during the pandemic. And not only did I not know if I would see them again, I didn't even know if I would be able to make it to their funeral if it got to that point. And so the hardest part was just living with the anxiety and still trying to do my work, which is hard, right? It didn't feel, it was hard to like build up the strength, the discipline to get to the page when everything else felt so important in my life. So for me, that was the hardest part, was like remembering that poetry is important, that something that I can offer to the world is a way to kind of get closer to those conversations. Part of why I wanted it to be a bilingual book, right? The book is published in English and in Spanish, is because when I was a student growing up, and I was attending schools in English, I couldn't share anything that I was working on in school with my parents because my parents only spoke Spanish. So my hope is that if any students, if any young people, even adults, right? I have friends that are like book clubbing the book with their parents and then also like their books. So for me, like that is something that I can offer the people that I care about is a way to enter some conversations that are otherwise uncomfortable.
Hello. So I'm a teacher. I teach some of your poems in my class, and the students always connect to them very deeply. I wanted to thank you for making this translation because it's gonna be so much easier here at the border. A lot of the students speak Spanish, and so I'm gonna be able to do both. And I wanted to ask you. There's a line in the first poem that you read. I'm a Chicano from Chicago, and it's always stuck with me because it makes me feel like, is it specific? Like Chicago, is Chicanidad in Chicago different than Chicanidad in El Paso? Or, I don't know. I wonder your thoughts on Chicanidad across the U.S.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I think it probably is different in some ways. One of the things that struck me is that when I visited Los Angeles for my first book a few years ago, and somebody asked me a question. They were like, "Can I ask you something?" They were like, "Why do Chicanos fucking love?" I can't remember if it was like Morrissey or something like that. And I was like, "Do Chicanos love Morrissey?" I don't know if that's true in Chicago in the way that they were like, "Yeah, man, Chicanos in LA fucking love Morrissey." So I feel like there probably are some differences. For me, part of the reason of claiming Chicanidad in Chicago, part of it is the music, right? Chicano and Chicago are so close. There's to me, a beauty in that, right? But then too, Chicago also has a particular Mexican history and culture that is very deep and, also kind of feels not talked about. You know what I mean? Chicago is a city that is, at this point in time, predominantly Mexican American and descendants of Mexican Americans, right? So it was just a way to kind of claim the particularity of where we grew up, like children of, the slaughterhouses and steel mills in our neighborhoods and all of that. Yeah, for sure.
As well. And I really dug deep, and I didn't use humor though. I wanted to know, how did your family take your collection, or the people that you wrote in the collection? Was it received well?
Yeah. The people that I write about definitely received it well. One of the things that I'm proud about of the collection is some of the poems are written by the people that I write about. So 2 of the poems are written by my brother Pedro. Another poem is written by my wife Erica in response to a poem that I wrote. And so it very much feels kind of choral in that way. And that's something that I want to do more of. When I write about my family, I think about how I can write about them not just as they relate to me, right? So, for example, that first poem, it was very important to me that in writing about my mom, I think about her not just as my mom or as someone that, was the cook in our family, right? But more than her labor, who is this person when she's not around us? What does she desire? What does she want in her life? And so with my mom, that's a little bit tough because she tells us all the time that this is the life that she wanted, which I believe her. And yet I find myself wondering, if she didn't have kids, what would she be doing? And so I try to write from that kind of imaginative space. With my dad, our relationship is a lot more difficult. But I try to remember, again, his complexity. And so I don't write poems where I'm just angry at my dad, in part because though I feel anger at times, I don't know that that anger is constructive for us, right? I don't think that that anger opens the door to allow him to kind of have a conversation with me. And so I try to treat everybody that I write about the same way that I would write about myself. You know, I read that poem Ugly where I like tongue in cheek call my brother ugly, but then I also do the same thing with myself. So, yeah, I try to like remember that they're real people and especially, you know, before there was a little bit of distance because my parents wouldn't read anything I wrote. They only read in Spanish. Right now, they can read everything that I write. And so I want to make sure that I'm doing right by them. No problem. Thank you for the question.
For other I'm Alex. For other poets here in the audience, but you have a lot of work done, a lot of great poetry. What's the secret to keep writing? Do you have a secret? For me, that's the hardest part, to actually sit down and write. How do you do it?
For me, the secret to writing is reading. When I read poems, I get inspired to write. They make me kind of think about the world and kind of bring me back to writing and make me want to play with writing. The other secret for me is just having a routine. And so if I wait for inspiration to come and find me, you know, I would go months without writing anything. Inspiration is fickle. You can't count on it. But when I sit down and I make myself write, for me, I always think about it like with therapy, right? Like, sometimes I go to my therapist and I'm like, you know, I'm good. I don't have anything to talk about. And then my therapist will be like, you know, tell me about what you ate for lunch. I'll be like, strawberries. And for some reason, strawberries will trigger me and bring me into like some subconscious conversation. For me, writing works the same ways. A lot of times I'll sit down to write, no plan whatsoever, but I write an image, a word, a phrase, and it opens a door into like something that I'm feeling underneath that. And so then that allows me, you know, I can find inspiration that way.
We got time for one more question.
I have a question. What did inspire you to write poems? What inspired me to write poems? I think what inspires me to write poems is a few things, right? One is, like, I really love my family and my culture and my language, and I believe that all of those things are worthy of art. And so for me, it's just about, I like writing poems and I'm inspired to write poems because when I pay attention to the world, there's always beauty and surprise and wonder and something that calls out to me. And so for me, poetry is a way of kind of responding to that.
Well, I have another question. Have you ever planned to write like a novel or a biography?
Yeah, so my next book is going to be a novel. So that's the next thing that I'm working on. I haven't written it yet, so I have no idea exactly. I have like the very outline of it. That's it. So it's going to be a work in progress. Fiction, yeah. It's going to be a novel.
Well, I hope that you have a great luck on writing your novel.
Thank you.
Let's give it up for...
Thanks, Joe.
So, is kind enough to offer to sign some books. Those of you who asked a question are welcome to get a copy. I will also say that you're welcome to join us later tonight at the open mic, the Bar open mic that we're going to have at the Pink Cloud, 3019 Montana from 6 to 8. He's a featured performer. And some of you who are here are also going to read a poem, as I understand it. So you're welcome to stop by. It's family friendly, and there's going to be food for sale. Thank you all for coming, and feel free to stick around for photos and book signings.